Hey everybody, Dave here with the second part of my GM overview for Outlaws of Alkenstar, a adventure path for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. As always, I want to start this with a couple of reminders for everybody. First of those is there's going to be spoilers. There's going to be a lot of spoilers. In fact, the whole purpose of this video is to talk about spoilers. So if you are a player, I appreciate you clicking on the button to view, but this video is not for you. So any players watching this, I ask that you go ahead, click the like and subscribe buttons, and then just move on to your next video so you don't worry about spoiling anything for you, or even worse, potentially spoiling things for your fellow players. Second point I want to bring up before we start is that, again, this is part 2. So if you have not seen part 1, I highly recommend you go and watch part 1 first, because I will not be covering a lot of the same territory. That video goes over the story and the major events of the campaign, and this video is more about my personal opinion, my take, and recommendations for any kind of roadblocks you might encounter when you run that adventure. So again, if you haven't seen part 1, the link is in the comments. Make sure you go do that first and then come back to this video. And the third reminder is, once more, I am not someone who has played this. I have not GM'd it. I don't have any table experience with Outlaws of Alkenstar. I have only read through it and gone through many different comments on the official forums and the subreddits and everything else. So my perspective is going to be either that of someone who has just read it or have pulled the perspectives from other people who have actually played it. So with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and dive in. And I always like to start with talking about things I like about the adventure path. First is it has a very satisfying opening to the adventure. One of my little concerns, complaints, if you want to call it that, with some other adventures, especially for first level adventures, is there seems to be a trope of, we're going to take our heroic characters, and the first thing they do doesn't always feel super heroic. The stereotypical trope is you're hired by an old lady to go kill giant rats that are in her cellar or something like that, and the Pathfinder basic box set actually kind of plays humorously with that trope. Or it could be, there's a couple of goblins and they have killed a local farmer's cow and you got to go deal with it. It doesn't feel heroic. It feels like, this is, there are training wheels on you, and we are going to gently nudge you into a heroic life. But Outlaws of Alkenstar doesn't go that way. Your very first scripted encounter is you straight up rob a bank, and I really like that they looked at this. They said this is a fantasy western. How are we going to kick this thing off? Let's kick it off in style. Let's not tiptoe around the theme. Let's not have kid gloves on for first level characters who we think we need to kind of scaffold into a heroic career. No, just right off the bat, you're robbing a bank. And at the same time, the adventure does give you context as to why the bank is unusually vulnerable at that moment, where it's conceivable that a level of first level heroic outlaws could realistically get into the vault there without it then having this precedent that, all banks in Alkenstar are have such lax security that anybody of any heroic level could march in and take whatever they want. So yeah, my first like is I really like the way they kind of set the stage, that this is a Western with a fantasy vibe and is not catering to this, trope of You got to kill a couple of little goblins, or get rid of the rats in the cellar, that sort of thing. We're just diving right in. I also really appreciate how this adventure path just leans into the fantasy western vibe and really immerses the players in this unusual location on Golarion that is far removed from the traditional Western European medieval fantasy that we often find in, Pathfinder, D&D, Middle Earth, and so on and so forth. It still has its place in the world of Golarion that is also occupied by those traditional Western European themes, but it is decidedly American Old West flavored, and they really lean into that. Again, like you start right off the bat with an iconic Old West moment of robbing a bank. There's also saloons all over the city. You don't go to taverns. You go to the saloons with swinging doors and the whole nine. In one of the later books, you hijack a stagecoach. The entire campaign has its climactic events on a riverboat that is loaded with dynamite. Uh, every little piece every little piece of books 1 and 3. Book 2 could be a little bit different. I'll talk about that in a bit. But it seems to be very intentional that they're really leaning into this Old West vibe, and I think done very well with it. All the way down to the names, like the key villains are the Crooked Cop is Deputy Angelique Lovelace. And Angelique Lovelace just seems to ooze Old West to me. That sounds like an Old West villain from like a John Wayne movie or something like that. And the other major villain is Ambrose Mugland. And just Ambrose Mugland also just feels like it's thematically appropriate as an Old West, crooked banker. So much of it is just spot on. In talking about those two major villains, another thing I really like about this adventure path is the players know the villains. They know Mugland right off the bat, and I think there are also some backgrounds that connect to Deputy Lovelace as well. So often, a lot of these adventures, I feel like there's a grand reveal of who the villain is right before the final battle with them, and it's kind of like, well, that's great, but my players haven't had any opportunity to interact with this person to get to know them. I think in other videos I've mentioned that I really like, in television and movies, a lot of times the villain just wipes the floor with the heroes in the first act. And then when the heroes triumph in the third act, it means something, because they have this established conflict and relationship with the villain. And so often it seems like either the villain's operating from the shadows and you don't get a reveal until very late, or the only way to really get to know the villains are for the players to go out of their way to research who this person is, to roleplay conversations with NPCs about who do you think the villain is, and who are they, and why are they doing the things they're doing, what's their motivation, or they have to give a big villain speech at the very end, right before they initiate their big plan. But with Outlaws of Alkenstar, you don't have to worry about any of those issues, because having conflict with Lovelace and Mugland is baked right into the backstories of your characters and leading into this. So right off the bat, they have a reason to severely dislike these people, and whenever their paths cross, which isn't too often with Mugland, there's probably more opportunity with Lovelace for those paths to cross. They mean something, and there's something tangible to those relationships, which I really like in this adventure path. So those are the key things that I really took out of the adventure path that I really liked. So now I'm going to dive into areas that could be not so much really dislike, but areas of concern and recommendations. And before I dive into this, I do want to mention that on one of my previous GM overview videos, there was a comment in the video to the effect of, wow, Dave spent 3 times as much of the video talking about the negatives than the positives, so he must really dislike this adventure path, or there must be really, really big problems. And I don't think it's really accurate to look at these in the same way. A minute spent on a dislike isn't equal to a minute spent on things I like, because I don't. There, if something is good, something I like, I think I can just kind of hit it and move on. Whereas if it's an area of concern, we really kind of need to dive into what the concern is and why it exists and what are ways we can navigate around them. So all that is to say, yeah, a lot of this video is going to be me talking about these concerns and possible recommendations of how to deal with them. But I by no means dislike this adventure path. I think this is a fun adventure. I think it's really succeeded on its goals of being the fantasy western adventure path. And when I read the subreddits and I read comments on the official forum and in my part 1 video, a common refrain from people was, I didn't like this piece, but I really had fun overall. I had concerns about, especially the second book. The second book comes up a lot in people's overall concerns. Like, it was a little bit of a drag, but I really had fun overall. So I wouldn't let the length of time I put into talking about concerns dissuade you. Weigh each of these points on its own merit to help you decide if this is something you want to GM or not. So first of all adventure paths to some degree are going to be on rails. That's just kind of the nature of playing a prescribed 10 or 20 level adventure. But you're especially on rails with Outlaws of Alkenstar. This is not an adventure where players are going to have a lot of freedom and agency to just do whatever they want. The adventure is scripted in such a way that there are key points that players are expected to hit, and in a manner that the adventure expects them to hit them. So for some people, that could be a major downer. For other people, like my players, I don't think that is a major problem. I think like they're along for the ride. They just want to let's go rob some banks and visit some saloons and have a good time, and they're completely on board for whatever is presented to them. For the most part, the on-rails portions feel very logical. So, for the most part, I think there's a point I'll be talking about a little bit later. But for the most part, it doesn't feel like you're being forced into a path that doesn't make sense. It's that the adventure kind of assumes you're going to go the way that is most logical. Or it could be that you have a quest giver who's giving you these quests in these missions. And she's not only telling you, I want you to go do this thing, but I've already done a lot of the legwork for you. I've already figured out the best plan to accomplish this goal, and I've already put into place things to assist you in completing the task by using my plan. So for some people, those elements are going to feel maybe a little too on rails. For other people, it might even be appreciated. But I just want to mention that this is definitely one where you're on rails a good bit. And kind of associated with being on rails so much is the danger of players feeling like they don't have a lot of agency in the story. And this is one of the big concerns that often came up. Especially in the fact that the players are always like 2 minutes too late to achieve their goals. And that repetition can drain on players, I think. So, for example, book 1 is an inventor has developed Pyronite, this extreme explosive, and the local government wants to make sure that this formula doesn't get spread widely. We don't want everybody to have access to this dangerous alchemical formula. So, players, we want you to go to that inventor's house, and we want you to escort him across the town to safety, where we can keep an eye on him and his formula. And no matter what the players do, no matter how well they succeed in that task, the end result is always the same, which is, yeah, you succeeded. You got Gattlebee and his formula to safety, but sorry, we found out that another person has already reverse engineered the formula, and now they have the formula. And then in the second book, you are tasked with finding this person who has reverse engineered the formula. You go through all kinds of challenges, and the end result is basically the same. Sorry, you're too late, but Muglin beat you to this person, and now Muglin has the formula. So now you're going to hunt down Muglin, because you got to get to Muglin before he can duplicate the formula and sell it and give it out to other people and let it spread. And you're never going to believe this, but guess what happens? It doesn't matter how fast your players catch up to Muglin, you're always 2 minutes too late, and he has, in fact, sold the formula to 2 other people. So, I think, like, the first time this happens is probably okay. It's bad luck. We were too late. But by the third time, we're going back to that well too many times, and are players going to feel like, oh, everything I did in book 1 to escort Gattlebee and keep him safe, that was a waste of time, because it doesn't matter. Someone's reverse engineered the formula. And then the second book, all the trouble we go through to get to the person who reverse engineered it, only to find out that Muglin's beat you and Muglin's got the formula. Is that going to feel like we just wasted all of our time? And then at the end of the second book, it repeats again. We finally confront Muglin, but with his dying breath, he tells you, "You're too late. I've already sold the formula to 2 other people. Tough luck." Is it going to feel like, again, did we accomplish nothing in these first 2 books? I guess other than getting vengeance upon Ambrose Muglin. I think this is one of the key reasons why book 2, so many people say that it feels like it's not rewarding. It feels slow. The pacing is off. It doesn't feel like it really matches with books 1 and 3. But again, just something to be aware of is there are frequent moments, I think 3 key moments in the first 2 books, where the players don't really have a whole lot of agency in the story. It doesn't matter what they do. They're 2 minutes too late, or too bad. Everything you thought you were accomplishing, you really don't accomplish, because the bad guys have already done something else. So what can you do about that? Without completely rewriting wide swaths of the story, there's not a whole lot. I think there might be some things you could do as a GM to kind of play up the fact that you're tracking time, and behind your screen, you're making notes, and let's real fast, let's touch base on what hour of the day it is and make sure that we're all together, because hey, I gotta track time here. Even if that doesn't ultimately mean anything, if you can bluff it, maybe you can sell that they actually are a little too late to prevent some things from happening. You might also be able to construct new endings to both the first 2 books that are more heroic. That was something I saw mentioned on either the forums or the subreddits, where people said, I just rewrote the endings to book 1 and book 2 to make it more heroic and satisfying. But nobody ever really went into details of how they did that. So this is something I'll invite people to do in the comments of this video. If you have suggestions on ways that you could rewrite the endings of book 1 and book 2 to be a little more exciting and a little more rewarding for the effort that players put in, include those in the comments. If you are one of these GMs who have done that, make sure you share what you did and how that worked for you. Another area that was frequently noted as being a concern are some inconsistencies in how Alkenstar is presented in the lore versus how playing a game in that location is treated mechanically. So for those who are not familiar, and this is going to be a grand oversimplification, but Alkenstar is a major city that is in the Mana Wastes. The Mana Wastes is a region of land that is between two historically warring nations who I believe at this time are at a period of peace. But those two nations are called Geb and Nex. Geb and Nex are both controlled by extremely powerful and evil magic users. So their war has been one that's been fought with a lot of fireballs and disintegration rays and magic as opposed to traditional martial warfare. And what centuries of magical combat between these two nations have done is the region of land between those two has turned into the Mana Waste, which is an area where magic no longer functions properly. So much violent magic over centuries has been used in this region that has completely distorted the fabric of reality and the fabric of magic. And at best, magic can be unpredictable there, and at worst, there are sections that are called magic dead, which are exactly what you would expect. Like, magic just does not function there. And that is why the city of Alkenstar has leaned so heavily into things like gunpowder and firearms and electricity and alchemy and all these other things that give magic-like advantages without actually being magical. But the problem is, when it came time to write this adventure path, Paizo does not like to place too many restrictions on what kind of character you can play for any given adventure path. Now, the player's guide says we suggest that these are probably the best suited classes and ancestries and alignments for the legacy of adventure paths. But it's rare that they just outright say, you cannot play this class, you cannot play a spellcaster. And they also don't want to put restrictions on any kind of playstyle that might feel punishing to those players. So, long story short, even though the lore says that magic doesn't function properly in this area, there are no restrictions or difficulties are placed on magic users in this campaign. They are expected to be able to cast their spells normally at all times, and there are some events that involve mana storms, which are magical storms that occur in the Mana Wastes, and those moments are meant to represent the chaotic and violent nature of magic. And so we have this conflict between what the lore says and what the mechanics say, and it kind of feels like, what's the point of having an adventure in the Mana Wastes if we're not going to use the flavor of the lore that makes it unique and interesting? So even though the rules say your spellcasters work completely fine, you don't have to worry about anything if you're playing a spellcaster, there are some people who want to include some of the flavor of the lore. And the book provides some options for those people, and some players have created their own options as well. So let me just go through some of these things. The first is on page 53 of book 1 of this adventure. It talks about Bronzetime and Surgetime. And what this basically means is there are powerful prognosticators in the city of Alkenstar who can very, very accurately predict the weather, so to speak, and can tell you at what times of day is magic going to be stable and at what times of day is magic going to be chaotic and out of your control. And so, what players can do is they can purchase what are called whisper sheets, which are basically just newspapers, and get a 48-hour forecast for magic in the city of Alkenstar. So, every day a new whisper sheet comes out and it tells you what you can expect for today and for tomorrow. And then every day the players would purchase a new whisper sheet to get the forecast moving further out. And the forecasts are broken down by hour. And every hour of the day is either going to be bronze time or it is going to be surge time. During bronze time, magic is stable, no worries, everything works perfectly. During surge time, magic's chaotic. And what that means is you run the risk of having a mana surge, a magical surge. So what that means is you cast your spell, you make a flat check, and depending on the result of that flat check, that will decide whether or not you trigger a surge or not. And if you trigger a surge, you go to another table and roll to see what the effects of that surge is. And so what you're going to need is in the Impossible Lands, page 233, there is a table of all the flat checks that need to be rolled to determine whether or not you cause a surge or not. And then in Secrets of Magic, page 250, it has tables that are the results of these surges. So if you do trigger a surge, then here's the effect. Bronze time, you're fine. Surge time, you run the risk. And I think maybe the tables on 233 might be a third option of basically you always just roll the flat check and see what happens, and maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't. But those are some options you can use to incorporate the flavor of the area mechanically into the story. But you got to be aware that your players may not, those spellcasters may not be super happy if during every climactic boss fight, they're spending their highest spell slot to do the thing they want to do, and then they get an undesirable result. For some players, this could be great. For other players, this could be a real downer, and maybe have that conversation with the player straight up that, like, you're running the risk of things going sideways. Now, if you do use Bronze Time and Surge Time and the Whisper Sheets, you as a GM are going to have to create these forecasts. You're going to have to break down each day whether or not it is Bronze Time or Surge Time. There's no guidance that I saw to help you. It's not like roll 1d20 and on a 15 or higher it's Surge Time, and on a 14 or lower it's going to be Bronze Time. There's nothing like that. It's entirely up to you to decide which hours of the day are Bronze Time or Surge Time, and there's no guidance that it's 12 hours and 12 hours, or if one is more dominant than the other. It's just whatever you want it to be. So you can try to schedule Bronze Time to be during the hours that you expect them to have major fights, and maybe schedule Surge Time for the hours where you expect them to have less significant encounters, but it might still be fun to play with this mechanic. But that's a lot of work for you as the GM to make these forecasts. It is also going to mean that you will be having to track every hour of every day to know where on the forecast the players land. So one of the potential roadblocks or hurdles playing in this particular part of the world where you want to engage with the lore is that players are most likely going to want to play characters appropriate for the lore. So you might have a lot of players who say, this is my first time that I get to play a gunslinger, so I'm going to play a gunslinger. Or they could say, this is the first time I could be an inventor and not feel completely out of place compared to the Western European themed parts of the world. So I'm going to play an inventor. And you end up with a team that has really latched onto this notion of magic is unpredictable, and the city has adapted in such a way to avoid magical use. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have no magic in our party. We're going to be gunslingers, inventors, other marshals, alchemists, and so forth. And that sounds great. In fact, thematically, that sounds kind of spot on. But the problem is, because of the lore of this area, Alkenstar and surrounding areas have grown to develop their own defenses and sensibilities that shun magic as well. And so what you end up with are a lot of enemies that are particularly well suited to defend against physical attacks because nobody expects a magical attack or an energy attack. So, for example, there are a lot of constructs in the city of Alkenstar, and a lot of constructs that are enemies to be faced by the players. But constructs typically, because of their very nature, they often have resistance to physical damage. So you have a group of players who have actively avoided playing spellcasters, so they do a lot of physical damage facing a lot of enemies that are highly resistant to physical damage. And that has been something that a lot of people have pointed out in the subreddits and on the forums as being a challenge. Is, I thought this was when we were supposed to be playing gunslingers, but we have difficulty putting down our enemies because so many of the enemies are specifically resistant to the kind of physical damage that we're putting out. If you have a traditional team of like 2 marshals and 2 spellcasters, probably won't be as big of a hurdle for that team. But then, does it really feel like Alkenstar if you have a lot of magic in your party? So just be aware that this campaign does include a lot of constructs and also oozes and some undead that would be more susceptible to magical and energy damage. And if your players all gravitate towards the gunslingers and marshals and avoid spellcasting, then they may be at a little bit of a disadvantage in some of those fights. So those are all kind of the general thoughts and concerns. Now I'm going to kind of break down book-specific things. And starting with book 1, one of the commenters on my original thread pointed out that when they ran book 1, their players did things backwards. The way it's intended is you rob the bank and then you make your escape. But what their players decided to do was, hey, let's make sure this escape route is clear of any challenges. So they wanted to go run the escape route first and make sure it's cleared out, and then rob the bank so that, they would know that once we're out of there, we don't have any problems, which is completely logical, and I completely understand people doing that. But just be aware that that's not the way the adventure is written. The adventure assumes that you're being chased by Deputy Lovelace and some crooked deputies when you make your escape into the scrapyard and so forth. So just have in the back of your mind that maybe your players are going to want to do this out of order and have a plan in place should they decide to do that. Another problem with book 1, and this is a reoccurring problem with other adventures and also with book 3 as well, and that is that maps don't really match up well with what's being explained in the adventure. It feels like the cartographers and the writers and designers were not all on the same page, and it can create some confusion. So let me bring up a copy of the map as it is presented in book 1. And so the major event in book 1 is you have to escort the inventor, Gattlebee, through the city, ultimately to the Barrel and Bullet Saloon. So you start here where it marks Gattlebee's house, and ultimately you're going to end up here at the Barrel and Bullet Saloon. So far, so good. But there are scripted events that occur as you are performing this escort mission. One of those things is that it says that you basically, after you extract Gattlebee from his house, you have a stayover in another location where you have an opportunity to rest and recover and maybe spend some time to let the heat die down a little bit before you resume your journey. And the location of that is not shown on the map. It is said that it borders the Ironside Quarter, so we can assume it's somewhere over in this general location. So we know we're going to be starting at Gattlebee's house, and we're going to be heading towards the Ironside Quarter. And then we're going to go from there to the Barrel and Bullet Saloon. And the major event that occurs during this is the players have to cross what is called the Bottleneck Bridge. And while they're crossing the Bottleneck Bridge is when the Powder Keg Punks attack them and take advantage of them being in a bottleneck. So the big question is, if we started here and we're now here, where is this bridge that we're supposed to be crossing to get to the Bullet and Barrel Saloon? It seems like this nice road around the little lake will lead us right to the Barrel and Bullet Saloon without the need to cross any water. Are they saying this big bridge in the middle of this little lake in the middle of the city, is this supposed to be the bottleneck bridge? If so, that's not necessarily the most direct way to get to the saloon. And I don't know why you would choose to go across a bridge like that. That would bottleneck you when you could easily just take this land route. And the narrative says that the bridge crosses the river, which would make me think it's one of these three bridges, and none of those make sense if you're going from Gattlebee's house to the saloon. And the encounter map for this encounter shows a bridge that's narrow and only 50 feet long. So it couldn't be this big bridge in the middle of the little lake or whatever this is in the middle of Smokeside here. So where the heck is this bridge that we're going to have this important encounter at? Well, there's a couple of suggestions from the subreddits and the forums. One is just to move the location of Gattlebee's house. If you moved it to the Capital District, you could use this bridge here as the bottleneck bridge that you would cross on your way, and that would make sense as a direct route to the Bullet or the Barrel and Bullet Saloon. But again, this bridge is significantly larger than the bridge that's presented as an encounter map that's fairly narrow and only 50 feet long. Now, the good news is some very talented people decided to create a lore-appropriate map. And they created a new map of Alkenstar, and I'm pulling it up here. And I'm turning it on its side. It's intended to be kind of landscape format and horizontal, but just so that it's easier to read next to the official map, I'm turning it on its side. And here we can see that they said, you know what, it doesn't make sense to have this isolated body of water. This body of water probably connects in some fashion to the river. And it might even connect with a passage of water from it into the Ironside Quarter, where that water would be used, to work in forges and so forth. So they've created a series of little canals that stretch out from the central body of water into the river and into Ironside. And this provides a couple of different options you might use to be the bottleneck bridge. And these are located in places that make logic sense. If you're having your stop at the edge of the Ironside Quarter and then resuming the most direct path to the Barrel and Bullet Saloon, that you would cross over potentially one or more of these little canals, and those could be where the powder cake punks are waiting for them. This map also has some other features in it that are going to be valuable in Book 3. Some important locations in the end of the book are, take place at this waterfall. So here, there's a 500-foot cliff or 500-foot drop that's a waterfall. And in Book 3, this location is extremely important. Specifically, there's a device called the Screw that is used to transport boats from the bottom of the 500-foot fall up to the top and vice versa. But the Screw is not located on the official map, so the person or people who created the revised map included here the Screw. There's also in the waterfall a hydroelectric power plant that's not shown on the map, and they also included that here as well. So regardless of how you want to manage wherever you're going to put this bridge that they need to cross, I really recommend you go and download the community fan-made version of the map. I'm including a link in the comment section that will point you towards the subreddit and the person who created this. And let me give credit where it's due. I believe the person who created the map is their username is Canner Fadarian. Again, the link's in the map, and I think they even credit other people who brought up suggestions like, oh, you could do this or you could do that. So it is a little bit of a community effort, although Cannon Fadarian is the one I believe who actually did the cartography and made the final map. So those are some concerns with Book 1. So now let's talk a little bit about some concerns that are specific to Book 2. Again, we're going to talk about maps. And the map for the Mana Wastes that's included in Book 2 really has no value whatsoever. It doesn't show you anything on it. It shows you a lot of locations, but none of those locations are, with maybe one exception, these are locations that your players don't visit or interact with or need to even know about for this adventure. And the single most important location in the Mana Wastes is the Cradle of Quartz, and it's not on the map. So what is this map for? I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of people who said, yeah, we got to this point where my players were getting on the airship, and so I pulled out the map, I showed it to them, and then everything fell apart because the key places that you would want on this map are not included on the map. So, warning number 1, ignore that map, don't even use it. Now, the second area of concern with Book 2 is the airship. This is a part of Book 2 where people said things slowed down, pacing was weird. There was a number of people who said, Book 2 feels like it doesn't even belong in this campaign, that it maybe was written for another purpose and then repurposed and kind of shoehorned into this campaign. Those comments, I think, maybe were directed more at the Cradle of Quartz dungeon location itself than some other parts, but let's talk about the airship. So what's going to happen is the players need to get to the Cradle of Quartz, which is in the Mana Waste, because that is where the person who reverse engineered the formula for Pyronite has run off to. So they need to get there. But they can't go by land because that would be several days through a highly dangerous environment that would surely kill a low-level party. So instead, they need to book passage on an airship to get there. Problem is, the middle of the Mana Waste is not a location that airships typically go. They typically go out to the gunworks and some other peripheral and adjacent locations that are relatively safe to get to. They don't go to out into the mana wastes. So the players will do a little bit of information gathering, some smoozing, and eventually find there is one airship pilot who's willing to make that trip. But she has some conditions. She's kind of down on her luck. She is past her prime, past her heyday, and is having trouble, I guess, getting customers for any locations, much less into the mana waste. So she says to the players, I tell you what, if you can sell the remaining seats on my airship, I'll take you there. But only if I have a full airship. And so there's 4 remaining seats, and each of those seats costs 50 gold to book passage. If the players happen to have an extra 200 gold lying around, she won't accept them. She won't let them just say, okay, you know what? We can't find other people to take these seats. We're in a rush. Here's 200 gold. We've bought out your airship. Let's go. She won't do that because within the narrative, the reason is because, like, she's got an ego. She wants to relive her glory days. She really wants to have a full house. Within the mechanics of the adventure, the reality is, well, we're setting up these events that are going to create complications during your journey to the Cradle of Quartz. And so we need people, we need NPCs to cause these complications and or to be additional suspects. So when the players are trying to figure out who the bad guy is, who's causing all these problems, the more people on board the ship, the more suspects there are, and the more difficulty they'll have in figuring out who the actual bad guy is. So there seems to be a feeling that this is slowing down the adventure. You hit this roadblock where we now have to go into a series of interviewing prospective people and convincing them to go on this journey. For some people, this is going to be a fantastic role-playing opportunity where they can role-play with all this diverse group of customers who each have their own interests and preferences and needs and try to convince them to go on this trip into the mana wastes. For other people, this is going to be tedious and not awesome. It is a DC 20 diplomacy or deception check to convince a person to go on this voyage. So what happens if you can't convince 4 people to do this? So the adventure provides these 7 opportunities for people to talk into getting onto the airship and going to the mana wastes. But what if your players fail all of their diplomacy or possibly deception checks to do this? What if they can't fill up the the airship, and by the way the adventure is written, the airship captain won't accept them to pay extra for the empty seats and so on and so forth. Like, what do you do? And I don't recall seeing a whole lot of guidance in the adventure for that. A couple of things that I saw online that people had previously done. One was, you know what, we're outlaws, right? We're outlaws. Let's be outlaws. So let's just steal this airship. She's going to take us to the Cradle of Quartz, whether she likes it or not. You know what? Players are unpredictable sometimes, and that could be a possibility. Obviously, the encounters that play out through the middle of it might be a little bit different, and also, I would caution against having the players get too comfortable being disruptive. That's not the best word. What I mean is, we expect them to be anti-heroes, right? But we don't want to forget about the hero portion of that and focus solely on the anti portion of that. This is not a campaign that is really intended for evil aligned characters. This is not intended for people who are just completely selfish and only worry about their own well-being either. This is, again, the to use the Han Solo or Malcolm Reynolds Serenity Firefly comparison. These are for people who may have challenges with the law, maybe be falsely accused, maybe be properly accused of something minor or whatever it is. But ultimately, they're supposed to be people who want to be champions of those who are downtrodden and being taken advantage of, and they don't want to see destruction and ruin come to Alkenstar. So the concern might be that hijacking an airship and holding someone at gunpoint and saying, "You're taking us to this place," might lean a little too far away from heroic for some people in some groups. Another option might be just script this as if Ambrose Muglin, maybe he owns a stake in a couple of airships, and it's going to be okay to to hijack an airship if you know you're hurting Ambrose Muglin at the same time, or maybe one of the players are doing their investigations to find an airship captain. They find an airship captain who's like, I'm the best damn pilot in the Manoways, but Ambrose Muglin, his bank foreclosed and they stole my airship. They said I owed him money and I don't, but they've got control of the airship, and if you help me go into that airship and clean out all the clockwork guards that are protecting it, I'll fly you to the Manoways if you help me steal back my airship. That might be a way to navigate this situation without it being completely dependent on rolling those DC 20 checks for diplomacy and deception and so forth. Now, obviously, if you go that way, your events are going to be a little different. There's still some events that are going to happen. You're still going to deal with mana storms. You're still going to deal with being attacked by creatures in the Manoways, but you're not going to have a saboteur aboard the ship, or you might. Maybe it is one of Ambrose Muglin's. Maybe Ambrose Muglin stole the ship away from the airship captain, and while you go through and clear out all the clockworks that are that are safeguarding it, you miss like one halfling engineer that was secreted away in a little hold or something, and they get out and start causing chaos while you're on your journey to the Manoways. So all of that is to say, the challenges involved in securing the airship and getting people on board it is an area in Book 2 that a lot of people called out as slowing the momentum of the campaign and causing its own challenges. So that might be something that you look at and consider doing differently. Another part of Book 2 that a few people called out as a challenge is once you get to the Cradle of Time, there is Cradle of Quartz. There is a monster called the Claws of Time that sort of hunts you throughout the dungeon, and that strikes me as kind of cool and interesting, and I like this idea. But a number of GMs reported that this monster may be just a little too tough, and several player deaths at the hands of the Claws of Time were reported, and most of it comes to an aura. It is a Hound of Tindalos, is a specific variant of a Hound of Tindalos that has a few amped up abilities, including an amped up aura. So it has a 30-foot aura that if you're in the aura, you have to pass a DC 29 fortitude save, basic fortitude save, and it deals 66 slashing damage. Now the good news is success makes you immune to the effect for 24 hours, but is still a relatively high fortitude save for 6th level players, 6th level characters, DC 29, and failing it, you suffer 6d6 slashing damage, and on a success, you still suffer half that. If players are having challenges hitting these fort saves, they can get chewed up by this aura pretty fast. So one suggestion online that seemed to get some support was just changing it from a 6d6 damage aura to a 3d6 damage aura. If you are a GM or a player who has encountered this Claws of Time, please share in the comments what your experience was. Was it that brutal? Did you suffer any deaths to this? And do you think just cutting the aura's damage in half would be sufficient? Let us know. I'm sure there's a lot of other people that would be interested in hearing from your experiences. Now we get into book 3. So my first concern with book 3 is, okay, so I guess within the story, within the narrative, by the time you get into book 3, you have caught up to Ambrose Mugland, you've exacted your vengeance on him, but with his dying breath, he's told you, you're too late. I've already sold the formula to 2 other interested parties. And the players don't know who these interested parties were that now have it. And so the beginning of book 3 is about finding out who these people are. So this is one of the spoilerly bits I left out of part 1 video, the identities. It turns out that one of these people is a representative of the nation of Geb, and the other is a representative of Nex. So now, one person of each of the 2 major warring factions that border the 2 sides of the Mana Wastes and Alkenstar's area of influence now have control of the formula, and they both have a reason to use it against Alkenstar. So this is something that I'm going to confess I feel like I'm just not reading something, I'm missing something, I'm not understanding something, because I do not understand what their motive is for using the Pyronite against Alkenstar in the way they do. So I'm going to bring back up the map of Alkenstar that we were looking at a little bit earlier. So we've got the map here, and what the adventurer says is they want to use the Pyronite to blow up the waterfall so that travel between Geb and Nex will be faster. And again, I feel like I must be missing something. There has to be something there I'm not reading or I'm misunderstanding. So again, if you understand, please say so in the comments and help me and help everybody else out there understand what the motive of these 2 villains is. Because as I read it, it just sounds like they want to blow up the 500-foot waterfall in the center of the river to speed up travel between Geb and Nex. So right now, Geb and Nex are enjoying a period of relative peace. So doing this could be beneficial when war breaks out, that each of them can use the river to transport troops and whatnot and supplies faster to the fronts of wherever the fights break out. And during times of peace, well, this opens up trade and they can make money that way. But the way that Alkenstar is situated right now, again, we have a 500-foot waterfall, and the only way to traverse this is through what is called the Screw, which is a rotating platform that raises and lowers that it takes hours for you to dock your ship into and go either down to the lower level or up to the top level. So this is the concern. We have a bottleneck in the middle of Alkenstar where it takes us hours to move our ships. And we don't want to have to deal with that. So we're going to blow up the Screw, and we're going to blow up this hydroelectric plant there. We're going to blow up the waterfall. And somehow that is supposed to make travel between Geb and Nex faster. And I struggle to understand. I can understand blowing up the Screw. That is, that's a man-made feat of engineering. You can blow that up with dynamite. Sure, okay, I get that. I don't see how blowing that up makes travel faster. In fact, that just makes travel impossible. Instead of waiting hours to get through that waterfall area, you're just now not able to traverse it. And if you literally, if blowing up the waterfall itself is even possible, I don't see how that makes it faster, because you're still going from, you still have a difference in elevation of 500 feet. So unless you're having extremely precise feats of engineering where you're having an extremely gradual incline instead of a 500-foot drop. I don't see how this is working, and you're not going to get that gradual incline by blowing up the waterfall. You would have to start miles back and, to lower. I'm not an engineer. I don't know what the degrees would be, but I feel like you would have to have a very gradual, over a very long distance to cover that 500-foot vertical drop. So I don't know what their true goal is. All right, so I suffered a power failure in the middle of shooting this video, and it's now a day later, and I'm going to try to pick up where I left off, which I believe was me lamenting that I just don't understand the plan of the two representatives from Gavin Nex, and the fact that they want to blow up a waterfall, which I don't really understand how that works. And beyond that, I don't understand how doing so would meet their stated goal of wanting to have a faster waterway through Alkenstar to connect Gab and Nex together. So they're part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is Deputy Lovelace. And why is she involved in this scheme? And that answer is much more straightforward. And that is just simply she has been trying to convince the city of Alkenstar that there needs to be more brutal punishments for criminals. She needs more guards. She needs to be elevated in power. She needs more arms and support. And as a crooked cop who I think wants to seize all the power she can, she sees this terrorist attack being perpetrated against the Screw and blowing that up as a piece of evidence that she could use to support her claim that crime in the city is out of control and I need more power, I need more resources, I need more manpower assigned to me under my command and help her rise in power in the city. So if I was to run this, I would just completely ignore the plot point about the representatives of Gem and Nex wanting to blow up a waterfall to create a faster means of trade. I would probably just say, this is Deputy Lovelace's big plan, and she needs a vicious terrorist attack to strike against the city to get the political capital that she desires. And she's made this deal with the two representatives, and they're going along with it because, striking a blow to the city of Alkenstar is a good thing, and she is going to get what she wants out of the deal too, and just leave out this weird thing about blowing up waterfalls to create faster trade routes. But again, I feel like I have to be missing something here. If there is a more clear explanation in the books that I just missed, please let me know in the comments, and I apologize if I've created any confusion here. Now, moving on, there are a couple of encounters in Book 3 that were flagged as being a little deadly that you might want to consider. And the first of those is a pair of Smog Wraiths that the player is going to encounter inside of a laboratory. So what makes the Smog Wraiths so difficult is that they each have a 30-foot aura where they emanate smog, and anybody within that area is going to have concealment, and anybody standing in it, other than themselves, is going to potentially be sickened by it. So the fact that you have two of these in a confined space of the laboratory makes it very difficult for ranged players to find some place to stay out of the smoke. And melee fighters are going to almost guaranteed to be in the range and have to deal with the sickness. And this was one of the things I was flagged as, well, this is the gunslinger adventure path. This is the adventure path where you really want there to be gunslingers. So having this in a confined area where they're not going to be able to get out of it it feels especially punishing for what is considered a pillar or a theme of this adventure path. So you might want to take a look at that, and depending on the class makeup of your party, that might be something you want to deal with differently. You might want to try to increase the size of this room beyond what the encounter map that's published in the adventure shows, or play with the mechanics of that aura a little bit. Now, that's not the big deadly encounter for this book. The one that really gets a lot of people's attention is the Clockwork Puppeteer. This is another battle. I believe this is indoors inside the hydroelectric power plant. This is a fight intended for level 9 PCs. It is a Clockwork Construct 33 armor class, which might be a little in the high area. I don't feel like that's completely out of the realm for 9th level PCs. But the real concern here is it also has a 30-foot aura. This 30-foot aura is a clockwork swarm. So all these little clockworks are just swarming around it, and if a player is standing in that aura within 30 feet, they're going to suffer 4d8 piercing damage every turn. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, this particular Clockwork Puppeteer can grab and hold up to 6 enemies at a time. And most Pathfinder parties are not going to be larger than 6. So what this thing does is it reaches out, it grabs. I think because it's a puppeteer, it might have it has strings that it can lash on to people. Grab them and hold them inside of this this aura, so they can't escape, or it's difficult to escape. They don't have to let go of one person in order to grab another, and they still have a little bit of mobility even when they are grabbing, and hold those players inside that aura to take 48 piercing damage every turn. And this is not the boss of the hydroelectric dam of this set piece. This is a severe encounter on your way to the boss. So this is something that was flagged by a number of different players, or a number of different GMs who said my players had difficulty with this. And one person just recommended applying the weak template to what is already provided in the books and lower that difficulty a little bit. And I believe another person did say that this was the cause of a TPK in their game. But again, always take a look at what your players are and what their composition is, and maybe they have better ways of dealing with this, or maybe they're better prepared at that time to deal with a really brutal fight. But just be aware that this Clockwork Puppeteer has been flagged by a number of people in the community as something to be concerned about. So that's it for my recommendations by book. A couple of other just like general recommendations. The first is, if I was to run this, I would probably run a prologue. I would probably run one session that takes place before the adventure begins, and incorporate the reason why my players are wanted by the law and why they have a grudge against Ambrose and possibly Deputy Lovelace into that adventure. So as instead of having each person either take one of the different backgrounds from the player's guide or create their own backstory as to why they have these grudges and why they're wanted outlaws, I would probably have them play that as a group. And then I think there's more cohesion in the party if they're all wanted for the same thing and they're all together in this endeavor. And also, I noticed that there were some people online who said that by using the method that's suggested of everybody creating their own backstories, that sometimes you had players who were on a completely different page than the rest of the players. So I think I read one example was someone said, like, they have like 5 people in their party. 4 of them made backstories that were like, I was falsely accused of something, or I had to steal a scroll with a ritual on it from a church to cure the curse that was killing my daughter or something like that. Um, and now I'm wanted by the government and the church and stuff like that. And then there'd be this one player who was just like, yeah, I'm a serial killer and a cannibal, and I don't care about anybody but myself, and I just want to eat more people. And so you had this stark contrast between, one person completely had a different take on what the vibe was going to be than the others. And some of that also plays into what I was saying earlier about these are anti-heroes, but we don't want to focus so much on the anti that we forget about the hero, because this is ultimately a story where the narrative path is about you starting as outlaws in the city and you end it as the city's heroes. And so that's our growth. That's our character growth throughout this arc, throughout this campaign. Starting wanted by the government and then ending being praised by the government and being praised by the citizens for what you've done. And if you have players who make their characters so completely selfish that they say, why should, hey, these people have been hunting me, they've been wanted, these cops have been coming after me, I'm wanted. Um, I don't care if Deputy Lovelace blows up the screw and disrupts the city. I don't care. Like these people hated me. Why should I support them? If they're so selfish that they're not willing to be heroic at the times when the adventure calls for you to be heroic, then that could be a problem for the adventure. So I would probably create a prologue session where I would map out exactly what the event is and have the players as a group go through that and make sure everybody's on the same page and everybody has this cohesion that they are wanted for the same reason or for the same event, and they're all together. As far as questions that were posted to the comment section of the first video, I think I've pretty much touched on all of them. I think I've pretty much answered everything that came through just by going through what I have. The only remaining question is the same question we always get for the level 1 to level 11 adventure paths, which is if I start my campaign with Outlaws of Alkenstar, what 3-book adventure path should I go to after I conclude Outlaws of Alkenstar? And my answer to this is probably going to be the same as it's always been, which is I would recommend Stolen Fate. I'm GMing Stolen Fate right now. I really enjoy Stolen Fate. I think it is just a great, fun adventure path that can be plugged into just about anything else. It's not super rooted in a particular location or a particular playstyle, and so that's usually my go-to answer for what to play next. Now the other option is going to be Fists of the Ruby Phoenix. Now Fists of the Ruby Phoenix might be very interesting to pair with Outlaws of Alkenstar, because Outlaws of Alkenstar is a fantasy western and Fists of the Ruby Phoenix is like a fantasy eastern. So by the time that the players end book 3 of Outlaws of Alkenstar, it's completely conceivable that they've made a name for themselves. And word of that could reach all the way to Tian Shaw, and when it's time for them to prepare for the next Ruby Phoenix tournament, they could say, hey, let's invite these people. And the fact that they're all gunslingers and inventors and they have gunpowder and all this, in the Ruby Phoenix tournament, or at least this version of it, is all team-based. And there are team identities. And I think this could be an appealing, different team identity than what you're getting from a lot of the Eastern flavored monks and so forth. So that could also be an interesting possibility as well. Stolen Fate, it kicks off in Absalom, so you would have to find some way of getting your players from Alkenstar to Absalom for the beginning of that. But considering the entire adventure path is all about fate and how fate can seemingly control people or control outcomes, there might be a way that you can think of that fate brings them to Absalom to kick this off. And the other thought is you don't have to set this in Absalom. You could very easily take the beginning of Stolen Fate and set it in Alkenstar. I don't think you really have to have it in Absalom, because they're not ultimately not going to be inside of Absalom very long. I think any metropolis big city will do. Alright, so those are my thoughts for the Outlaws of Alkenstar Adventure Path. As always, if you have any further questions or any additional insight or comments or anything you can share from your experience either playing this or GMing it, feel free to leave those in the comments. And as always, I want to take a quick moment to say thank you to everybody out there who supports me and this channel, whether that be by clicking the like button, clicking the subscribe button, sharing the videos, commenting, buying a super thanks. I really appreciate everything you folks do to support me. And with that, thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming.